And that's, during that 2.5 seconds, it fell 100 feet, more than 100 feet, about eight stories at free fall speed. And NIST will finally, in their final version of the report, admitted that because they had to. It's proven, and you can easily demonstrate that with rudimentary physics software and the videotape of the collapse. And so they had to admit finally that for 100 feet it was falling at an acceleration equal to what it would fall with no support at all. And then they just pretended that didn't matter.
There's so many reports, and the reports are so long, and I don't think too many people will actually read them. And these secondary reports that come out later to correct the errors in the first report,
right.
Who reads it? No one.
Right. And I mentioned earlier, there's some papers written supporting the official story, and one of the authors on those papers is a guy named Frank Greening. And one of the things that he said in kind of a dialogue with that physics teacher, high school physics teacher, David Chandler is his name, in a email exchange with them, Greening, again supporting the official story, said that Newton's third law doesn't apply to collapsing buildings because the official story cannot account for the collapse in a way that doesn't violate Newton's third law. Newton's third law is that when essentially for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, is the way it's often said. And David Chandler does a video showing why this is significant. Also with NIST, with their report on the collapse of the Twin Towers, it's supposed to be a report on the collapse of the Twin Towers, but it's actually a report on the initiation of collapse. They don't cover the rest of the collapse at all, except for saying global collapse ensued. That's it. So they don't deal with the fact that it fell too quickly and so on. They don't have to because they don't cover it.
Like Building 7, they just don't cover it.
The 9/11 Commission didn't cover it. Eventually, NIST covered it, but they covered it in a way so as to make it seem like there's nothing amiss, claiming that it fell at 40% slower than free fall speed. And again, or in addition to the fact that they omitted initially making clear that for part of that time it fell at free fall speed, and that's what really needs to be explained. But in addition to that, the way they get their number of 40% slower than the rate of free fall is they start counting at an arbitrarily early point. Right? So it takes, for them, it took longer to fall because they started counting the fall before it started to fall. I mean, they might as well have said it took 30 years to fall, if you're going to just pick some arbitrary point to start counting. So, I mean, it's pretty clear that the investigation is not being done in an honest way. And you can watch these people from NIST when they're asked questions, as they were when they were trying to defend this in the public forum for this draft of this document. And they just spin like crazy. And when they were asked about the molten metal, they just deny that there is any molten metal because they can't explain it. But there's so much evidence from the microspheres that we talked about to the video evidence to the temperatures of the pile, and on and on and on. There's something to be explained there, and they just can't explain it, so they deny it. And you can watch them deny it. And I think it's useful to watch them because you get I mean, when somebody is dissembling, you can't always tell But when you can tell, you can really tell. So I encourage people to Google NIST denies molten metal, for example.
Do you remember George Bush in the school when they notified him that the Trade Center had been attacked? Do you remember how he looked? That certainly looked to me like someone who was dissembling something.
Yeah. And why didn't the Secret Service act? Why did they let him sit there? And that's another question that's very bizarre. And we didn't even talk about the war games. I'm not really prepared to talk about all the details on that, but there were some very strange war games that were going on that day, which could have been used to make it more difficult for there to be an effective response to those flights.
And then there was the question of the cleanup. All of the buildings were built with big steel columns, and it turned out that the steel columns conveniently exploded and came down in the right size to be trucked away. Most of them were just the right length to fit on the trucks. That was very convenient of Newton's laws of physics to create beams that were just the right size for the trucks. Of course, if you had a controlled demolition, then you would arrange to cut the beams at the right size, which they'd always do in controlled demolitions. But they also cleaned it up very quickly. Wouldn't you think that they should have given us an opportunity to investigate?
They should have treated it as a crime scene, which it obviously was, but they didn't. And they also, didn't. They misled people in terms of the safety of the situation there, and a lot of people are getting sick, and people have died because they said, the air is safe to breathe when it wasn't, and there's evidence that they knew that it wasn't. So there's so many levels at which this really does need to be looked into further.
Well, we're running out of time. Kurtis, it's been very interesting, and I want to thank you for coming.
My pleasure. It's been great to be here.
Thank you.
It's important to talk about this. It's not easy to talk about. It's not easy to find a forum. It's difficult for people to deal with, and it's something that takes a process too. And I hope people who are watching this show take the time to look at some of the evidence that we've talked about, and because it's not going to, your view is not going to change by listening to us. It's going to change, if it does, after your own examination of the evidence. That's what I think.
And you can go online. There's a group here that I referenced earlier in Burlington that is campaigning for a new independent investigation. And the website is vt911.org. And if you look at that website on the internet, you'll find all sorts of other information and links to other sources. I encourage everyone to do that. So I want to thank all the people at home for viewing us, and we'll be back next month with another edition of Vermont Today.